Hello. Hello, Dr. Henning.
Hello, Ram. Namaste. Great
Namaste.
pleasure to be
Namaste.
with you and all the other friends of meditation and spirituality. Hello, good morning.
Good morning. So, hearty welcome, Dr. Henning. So, a little bit introduction. So, we started this journey of meditative musings last evening, 10 p.m. Germany time. And we had a series of masters connecting from Australia, New Zealand, Europe, USA, and with gaps of meditations. And now we are with your session. And to give a little bit introduction, friends. So Dr. Henning, I met Dr. Henning few years ago during COVID time in a similar Zoom meeting. It was organized by Dr. Saurabh Ranjan and his friends from India. And they were, let's say, bringing every week people who are connected to health, so doctors, and then they see different side of healing modalities. And that is where I heard Dr. Henning, and I came to know that he was very close here. So we live in Heidelberg, and he is as well living here very close. And then I felt, wow, you see how beautiful this world is. We have people who are working towards the betterment of the society, looking things from different perspectives and helping the world. So thanks a lot, Dr. Henning, for all the beautiful work you are doing to everyone around and to this world. I have searched on the internet and I have seen how much you have contributed to the health industry. So thanks for that. A little bit of introduction as well. So friends, Dr. Henning was born in 1964 in Laupheim, Germany. And since his youth, he has been interested in connection between spirituality and science. The medical profession seemed to him the most ideal way to harness this interest in his life for others and for himself. He completed his medical studies at the University of Ulm in Germany, and he received his license to practice medicine in 1992. In 1995, after successfully completing his doctorate in psychotherapy, he was awarded the title of Doctor Medicine. And in 1996, Dr. Henning Saupe also received his Swedish license to practice medicine and worked for 10 years in Stockholm as a general practitioner with an interest in naturopathy, anthroposcopic medicine, and holistic cancer therapy. From 1997 to 2006, he served as a board member in the Swedish Association of Anthroposcopic Physicians. In January 2005, he founded and opened the Arcadia Clinic in Stockholm, the first hyperthermia clinic in Sweden, specializing in oncological hyperthermia. In 2006, he founded the Arcadia Clinic in Kassel, Germany. He has served as a medical director of the clinic with a team of 25 employees, including 3 medical doctors. He has been awarded various awards. He has given regular lectures in Scandinavian countries and in 2009 as well in USA on the topic of holistic cancer treatment. In 2007, he was awarded the Professor Olof Lindel's Prize for Complementary Medicine at the House of Parliament in Stockholm for his merit in introducing medical hyperthermia to complementary medicine in Sweden. He even gave a keynote speech at the Annie Appleseed Conference in West Palm Beach, Florida. And in March 2023, he was nominated to join Holistic Leadership Council in the USA. He's the member of International Clinical Hyperthermia Society and German Society of Oncology. In November 2021, his book Understanding Cancer and Treating It Holistically was published in German, and the English translation came out under the title Holistic Cancer Medicine in 2022. So he had as well been a speaker twice at Spiritual Doctors for Holistic Health, which I was earlier referring. So we have such a wonderful doctor and a master and a person here from which we can learn a lot. And today, Dr. Henning, we welcome you, and we are looking forward to listen about this true healing and relationship between Dvaita and Advaita Vedanta in Indian philosophy. With this, Dr. Henning, I hand over the stage to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram, for your kind introduction. It's a great honor to be with you and our audience. And you asked me for a lecture, and I asked you, how about this topic, the relationship between dualistic and non-dualistic worldview or philosophy, and what that has to do with healing. This is something I have pondered for many, many years around this worldview. When we speak about spirituality and meditation, we often feel intuitively that the world is one and that we are connected with our breath to everything that is, to God and the universe around us. And then we go into this busy world and use our cell phone and go and buy grocery, and we have some aches and go to a doctor, and we fall into the dualistic world where spirit and matter seems to be separate. And the big question is, what is the real truth? Is the world one, or are there two worlds? And this is exactly my topic. The relationship between these two worldviews, these two mindsets, and what that has to do with healing. So bear with me through my lecture. I'm excited to share with you my humble thoughts and insights on this really big topic. And now I try to share my screen with you, and I hope that that works. So now everybody should see the first page of my presentation. Do you see that, Ram?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
So again, the title, True Healing and the Relationship Between Dualistic and Non-Dualistic Worldview. And if we speak Sanskrit, we call dualistic Dvaita. It's almost like the English word of divided. Dvaita, the Sanskrit word of dualism, and Advaita, the opposite of it, the non-duality, the non-dualistic worldview that we find in the Holy Scriptures of the Vedanta, and I will soon tell you what that is. The Vedanta is a chapter in the Vedic Scriptures. And the Vedic Scriptures is the wealth of spiritual knowledge in Hindu philosophy, and it has a long, long tradition, and nobody exactly knows when it started. It's told that the origin of the Vedic Scriptures lies in the time many thousand years ago, and for thousands of years the masters have received it as something that they listened to. So the roots of the Vedic Scriptures come from Shruti, the Sanskrit word of sound, of revelation of spiritual knowledge and truths perceived through listening. And it took thousands of years from the mouth of the guru to the student, to the next generation of students, to the next generation of students, until masters have written it down and that dates about 1,000, 1,200, 1,300 years back in time, where the first documents have been found that wrote down the content of the Vedic scriptures. And there are many chapters and many branches of this huge tree of knowledge. And I want to guide you to one special tree, to one special branch of the tree, which is called the Upanishads. You find it in this picture on the right side of the second layer, bottom down. And that is where you find the most philosophical aspect of the Vedic scriptures that tell us about the deep truths of the universe, of God, and our being. So the Upanishads, literally the word means, it's Sanskrit of course, it means sitting next to the Guru, Upanishad. So when we listen to the Upanishads, we can imagine that we sit at the feet of a Guru, listening to his knowledge, listening to his wisdom. And we can say it's India's greatest spiritual treasure, the culmination of wisdom. The Vedas that contain a wellspring of profound knowledge, philosophy, and this wealth of knowledge has influenced the writing of many famous authors in the last centuries. The authors of spiritual literature like Gurdjieff, like Kahlil Gibran, like the American philosopher Emerson, or the German classic philosophers Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, or the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and many others. So it's a well of knowledge, a source of old divine wisdom. At the end of the Upanishads, there is a chapter called Vedanta, and that means the end of all wisdom, the end of Veda. And Vedanta is described as one of the 6 darshanas. So what is a darshana? A darshana is explained as one perspective or one special attempt to perceive the world from one particular angle. So Vedanta is one particular way to look at the world and to look at the ultimate truths, and it represents the end of the Vedic scriptures, the end of all wisdom. And in this chapter, we can learn about the 2 worldviews called Dvaita or Advaita. Dvaita, let us start with that, is a way to look at the world where everything is described in a way that is called Samkhya. And Samkhya stands for number. There are a million things, or a million times a million things in the universe, and everything seems to be separate. And Samkhya counts all the different details of the world and explains them as separate from each other. And that gives rise to the philosophy of Dvaita that looks at the world as a huge amount of phenomena that are separate from each other. There is the tree, there is the stone, there is the water, there is the bee, there is the bird, and there is me, and all things seem to be separate. And in Dvaita, in this way of looking at the world, in this mindset, this perspective or darshana, God seems to have 2 sides. And in Sanskrit, one aspect of God is called Purusha, which is awareness, spirit. And the other side of God is described as Prakriti, that is matter. So even God falls apart in the Dvaita way of looking at the world into 2 aspects. There is God's awareness, Purusha, and there is a matter aspect, the universe, the creation, which is Prakriti, and these 2 seem to be separate. But then another chapter is opened in the Vedantic scriptures of the Upanishads that says the final truth is Advaita, Vedanta, non-duality is the end of all wisdom. How can we comprehend that? How can we get a feeling of what that is? Let us honor the saint, the master that has written down these chapters on Vedic philosophy. His name was Shankara, and he lived in the 8th century between 788 and 1820, and is believed to be the most important and most influential Indian philosopher and interpreter of the Upanishads. And Shankara is called the teacher of Advaita, of non-duality. He even uses a more intensive way to express it. He calls it Keval Advaita, the absolute non-duality, the absolute truth, Advaita. The relative truth is space and time creates the illusion of a separate world. But behind that, if we penetrate the veil of this relative truth, we can enter the sphere of Advaita, acknowledgement of the non-duality of the world. And this is what his teachings are about, to guide the spiritual student to the inner experience of non-duality. He teaches the distinction between the illusion of the division of the world and the true reality, which in another beautiful and very famous Sanskrit word is described as Brahman. So what is Brahman? Brahman is, what I show in the next slide, the essence of Shankara's scripture. With this slide, I wanted to show that he influenced 1,000 years later so world famous philosophers as Arthur Schopenhauer, who lived in the 18th and 19th century, and with his most important philosophical work, The World as Will and Representation, we can still feel the inspiration from Shankara and translate Schopenhauer's words of will with the Sanskrit word Brahman, and Schopenhauer's world of representation, how the world looks like, how the world appears as the scattered world in space and time. And if we read Schopenhauer's world as will and representation, we can still hear the spiritual inspiration from Shankara, and even Schopenhauer comes at the end of this philosophical world to an Advaitic interpretation of the world. The mantra of Advaita, as it is called in the words of Shankara, is this, and it's so beautiful and something I can share with you as a very precious mantra for meditation. And in Sanskrit, allow my humble way to pronounce it. I don't know if it is correct. I would pronounce it as Brahma Satyam Yagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. And in English it means only Brahman is real, the world is illusion. The absolute is nothing but Brahman alone. Another way to come closer to the non-dualistic Advaitic principle of Brahman is the beautiful word Satchit Ananda, a very short mantra that is a beautiful meditation word that we can enliven in our consciousness, knowing that the syllable Sat stands for being, the imperishable being, and the syllable Chit stands for pure consciousness and total awareness. And the last syllable, or the two syllables Ananda, stand for bliss, the ecstasy of being. So when we say Satchit Ananda, we think at the same time as the being, the imperishable, filled with pure consciousness and total awareness, and feel inside ourselves the bliss of being imperishable, purely conscious, total aware. This is the nature of Brahman, the core concept of Advaitic philosophy. Time moved on after Shankara, and this relationship between the dualistic world and the non-dualistic world became again something that philosophers pondered about and made up their minds how to get these worlds together. And an interesting mixture of the two worldviews was formulated, was described by another Indian philosopher. And the philosophy became famous under the title of Achintya Beha Abeta. And it means literally the inconscious and the unity. Acknowledging that we human beings, and in modern times certainly more than 1,000 years ago, are confronted with the dualistic world. I use my cell phone, it's not me, it's something outside myself. I use my pen, I use objects in the physical world, and I feel that the world has fallen apart in all these different aspects. And then I do the meditation and connect with everything that is and dwell for a moment in the non-dualistic world. But how do I get these two together? So the paradox in this integral monism, as it is called in the worlds of philosophy, is dissolved through the concept of a simultaneous coexistence of the principle of duality, Dvaita, and the principle of non-duality, Advaita. And it is said with the Sanskrit word of achintya that we cannot understand it. It's incomprehensible. Well, if something is incomprehensible, I feel that I want to understand it. I feel that I want to dig a little deeper in this complexity and find ways to dissolve the fact of incomprehensibleness. I want to see where do these two aspects meet, the aspect of non-duality and duality. So bear with me and I will guide you a little deeper into the connection of these two worlds. I do not follow Chaitanya, the philosopher of the 15th century in India, who says it's incomprehensible. I believe we can get a little closer to the truth. And as I'm a Christian, I also want to share with you that monism and Advaitic philosophy has also a place in Christianity. The concept of the Holy Trinity is a truly monistic or Advaitic concept. Christianity speaks about Father, Son, and Spirit, and that they are one. Jesus teaches monism and Advaitic philosophy when he says, the Father in heaven and I are one. And there are many other phrases in the Holy Bible that point to an Advaitic understanding of existence and the universe. Paradoxical language is often applied to speak about the inexpressible experience of non-duality. And I found a very interesting quotation from a world famous scientist, from Niels Bohr, who lived in Denmark and received the Nobel Prize for his insights in chemistry and quantum physics around 100 years ago. Really one of the most famous and most important scientists of the 20th century. And in one lecture, he says the following phrase: the opposite of a true statement is a false statement. That is definitely true as long as we are in the world of dualism. One thing is right and one thing is wrong, the opposite. But Niels Bohr continues in a very surprising way. Imagine he's a Nobel Prize laureate, a chemist, and a highly knowledgeable scientist at the beginning of the 20th century, and he says the following phrase: the opposite of a deep truth may well be another deep truth. Doesn't that point to the world of non-dualism, to the world of Advaita, where opposites are true? They belong to the same world. They are at home in the same non-dualistic understanding of God's universe. Again, this phrase, it can be a meditation phrase too. The opposite of a true statement is a false statement, Dvaita. The opposite of a deep truth may well be another deep truth, Advaita. And you can find examples for the second part of this statement. Let's use a picture that is often described in Buddhism and mentioned in Zen Buddhistic stories, where it's said, the ocean contains many, many drops of water. And in every drop of water, the ocean is contained. So the opposites point to the same truth. Here is a picture from a medieval painter that shows the Trinity in Christian theology. The term Trinity as the root of existence, as the very being of God, of Brahman in the Christian philosophy, came from an early bishop called Augustine. He was called the Church Father and lived in the 4th century. And from Augustine we can learn that God has 3 aspects, but they are united in one being. And this rhymes very well with the concept of Brahman, if you ask me. A threefold oneness of Father, which is the being, in Latin esse, in Sanskrit sat. And there is the Son aspect of it, in English knowing, in Latin nosse, in Sanskrit chit. And there is the Spirit aspect of God. In Latin you can say vele, in Sanskrit Ananda, the bliss. And it is the doing and loving aspect of God. And these 3 aspects are not separate from each other. They are one. But they are a dynamic oneness with 3 qualities that represent a oneness and a dynamic threefoldness at the same time. How can we go from one understanding, for instance dualism, to the other understanding of the world, monism, from Dvaita to Advaita? Are there doors between these 2 realms? And I believe yes, there are. And I call these door portals between the 2 worlds, and tools. We can use these portals as tools to manifest Advaita. For instance, can we enter the world of, or the knowledge or the mindset of Advaita by chanting mantras? And if we chant mantras in holy languages, we will have a wonderful portal experience that guides our mind, our awareness into the mindset and into the experience of oneness. If we chant mantras in Sanskrit, we can feel Advaitic awareness inside us. We can also use old languages like Aramaic or Greek, where the words have a deeper dimension. In modern languages, words are more like Dvaita. They have one single meaning. Clock, pen, cell phone. Everybody knows what that is. That's the world of Dvaita. But if I speak Sanskrit and say Satchit Ananda, I can be guided into the world of Advaitic knowledge, where the entities belong to each other, where oneness is made out of a dynamic combination of qualities. And the same applies for the old Greek language. The Gospels of John start with a very powerful word where it says, in the beginning there was the Logos. And Logos is a Greek word. And if you look up Logos in a Greek dictionary, you can find 2 pages of what it means. One word, Logos, can have 2 pages of meaning. It means sense, word, meaning, truth, spirit, etc., etc. One word in an old language can have so many meanings. And for me, this is an Dvaitic experience. If I meditate on a word like Satchit Ananda, or in the beginning there was Logos, I can enliven the word inside my awareness and feel all the different aspects that belong together and that are one, Advaita. Meditation, of course, is a portal into Advaitic consciousness. And we just had a wonderful introduction into a meditation experience. And I guess everybody here in this group of friends and listeners knows that meditation can guide us into the awareness of oneness. We can also use our breath. Breathwork is a portal between the 2 worlds. In Germany, there is a famous psychiatrist, Dr. Sylvester Walch, who introduced a special breathing technique in his therapy sessions, and he calls it holotropic breathing. It's an enforced way to breathe for 3/4 of an hour or an hour in a certain rhythm and a certain speed. And if you do that, you really, really alter your mindset and your awareness, and you get an experience that is close to the experience of taking or using a psychedelic drug. The awareness of oneness becomes much closer and dominating after a session of holotropic breathing than if we breathe the normal way. It's an experience that I had a few times on workshops and seminars where we did holotropic breathing, and it's really something very, very special and powerful. And there are videos on YouTube if you want to check that out. Just make sure you have a safe surrounding, maybe somebody who's next to you who takes care of you in case you get a little dizzy or you feel vertigo. But if you do it in a way that is instructed, for instance, by Dr. Sylvester Walch or another famous person who has become famous through his breathwork, Wim Hof, the Dutch extreme performer who dives into ice cold water for longer time than everybody could imagine that one can survive because he prepares himself with the breathing exercise. You can learn Wim Hof breathing or holotropic breathing and have an Advaitic experience of oneness if you do it in the right way. Psychedelic drugs can do the same, and it's a delicate topic because psychedelic drugs have been banned in the 1970s when the former American president Richard Nixon believed that psychedelic drugs are evil, and he banned them, and most countries around the globe followed this ban, although they were used in a very professional and powerful manner in university clinics from the 1940s on for the treatment of OCD or severe anxiety or post-traumatic stress. But you can read about the effects of the psychedelic drugs and what they do. And in our context today, I would summarize their effect as something that creates an awareness, an experience of oneness. People who have used psilocybin or under controlled and in a serious way, under controlled manner, LSD or DMT, can feel for a period of hours that they are one with everything and that their everyday ego melts away or disappears completely. They speak about ego death and the feeling of an all-loving oneness experience. And there are books written about that, how that is possible, and there are models described in textbooks. I will show you a book in the next slide, so that we even can understand neurologically what these drugs do to our brain. In a minute, I will go a little deeper into the explanation of that. Before we do that, let's look at other portals that we can use to enter the one world from the other, the world of non-duality, when we come from our regular mindset of dual experience of the world. We can use mindfulness thinking. And in the preparation for this lecture, I came to understand that mindfulness thinking, something I teach to my patients at our clinic and something I have practiced myself for a longer time, is actually a way of practicing Advaitic mindfulness, Advaitic experience. Mindfulness thinking, as described in the books of the American scientist and university professor Jon Kabat-Zinn, or the Vietnamese Zen Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh, teaches us to not judge, to be grateful, to listen and witness instead of judging and dividing. It also teaches us beginner's mind, to look at things with a new perspective, with a new mindset that is not flared by our preoccupations. A little bit of what a psychedelic drug experience can do for you, or a holotropic breathing experience. So mindfulness thinking invites us to go more into an Advaitic way to perceive the world and to relate to the world. 20 years ago, I met a very interesting, very powerful psychotherapist, the English psychotherapist and hypnosis therapist Colin Tipping. He wrote a book called Radical Forgiveness and became world famous through this book. And he teaches a way to forgive that he calls radically, a radical way to forgive. And I can recommend you to have a look at his book. You'll find it online. You find a website called Radical Forgiveness. So Colin Tipping became my teacher 20 years ago in this very special coaching technique or psychotherapy technique. It's more a coaching technique actually, that he calls Radical Forgiveness. And the culmination of the procedure to forgive radically is an Advaitic experience. And of course, we need to work a little bit and we need to read the book and we need to go through some worksheets to understand it, how we can get there. But I want to share with you today that the culmination of the procedure to forgive radically is the collapse of the dualistic worldview of a perpetrator and a victim, and the deep insight that there is nothing to forgive. If you find that interesting, I recommend you to read his book or have a look at his website. And for today, it's a tool, it's a portal that I share with you that helps you to go from the dualistic world aspect. For instance, in the division of a perpetrator and the victim, there is something that did something to me and that was wrong, and I'm the victim, I feel bad, and I cannot forgive because I have experienced something that was wrong, and the perpetrator needs to be prosecuted because he did something wrong. Yes, there is truth in this. This is the dualistic worldview. But the non-dualistic, the Advaitic worldview would be the perpetrator and the victim have done it together. They have danced a spiritual dance together that led to an experience of this dualistic world. And if we climb the ladder to the highest perspective of Advaitic non-dualistic understanding of the world, there was never a perpetrator, there was never a victim. The collapse of the system shows that we can be grateful for whatever we have experienced because it guides us through this experience of an incarnated, of a physical being in this physical, of a spiritual being here in this physical world where we make physical experiences and strive for non-dualistic manifestation of our being in this dualistic material world. So I hope I have raised a little bit of your curiosity for the strategy called radical forgiveness. We obviously have all something to forgive. And if you carry grudge around, if you carry something that comes from the past, that somebody did to you, I advise you to go a little more into forgiveness and to let this burden glide off your shoulders so you can move on freely as a free spirit. And the next line is what I do as a medical doctor. I deal with diseases and suffering in general. I meet my fellow men suffering from diseases and I try to make it easier for them to bear the suffering and to find a way to overcome the suffering. And after 30 years in this profession as a medical doctor, I want to share with you a deep insight. The insight is that every disease and every suffering can also be a portal to a spiritual summit experience, to a spiritual Advaitic experience. If you allow the disease and the suffering to really touch your soul and to change your life, it can become a tool to leave the world of Dvaita behind you and enter the world of Advaita. And of course, that requires a personal approach, that requires a sincere understanding of the disease and the karmic aspect of the disease and the personal aspect of it. But I find a really comforting, on a deep level, comforting spiritual truth in the fact that diseases and suffering in general can be used as portals for spiritual summit experiences. I promised you a few more words on psychedelic drugs as portals to a non-dualistic experience. Here you have the three most important molecules and the shape, how they look. They interact with serotonin receptors in our brain. Serotonin is a well-known and well-described messenger in our brain. It has to do with the aspects of vitality and happiness and creativity in our brain. And when we have too little serotonin, we might feel depressed and have no power and no willpower and no creativity. And these psychedelic drugs bind on the serotonin receptor and overwhelm the brain with something that is more powerful than serotonin for a while, and they lead to very, very special experiences. And for this lecture today, I only want to share with you that a good description of what these drugs do is to give the one who uses them a non-dualistic experience, where the standard default network of our brain, the way our brain interprets the world. And haven't we all learned the dualistic interpretation of the world? So the standard default network of our brain gives us a dualistic experience, a dualistic interpretation of the world. And this veil of dualistic interpretation seems to be taken away for the moment these psychedelic drugs are in our brain and give us the experience of being one with everything. This is a book that you can read by the American Dr. Rick Strassman, who also found, or in the literature, that one of these most powerful molecules, DMT, is most likely produced in our brain, most likely in the pineal gland, and in higher amounts under certain influences like lack of oxygen, hypoxia, or stress, and in the highest concentration in a near-death experience. So DMT is not foreign to the human brain. It is something that our brain produces at times. And DMT seems to be a portal molecule that takes away the interpretation mode of the dualistic view and opens up for a monistic, for a non-dualistic, for an Advaitic experience of oneself and the world. What causes this consciousness alteration? Is the drug blocking the perception of non-duality by lowering the conditioning of the standard default network? Or is the drug adding something, a sensation that is unreal and giving us a hallucination? You have to find out the answer. I raise the question. With the next slide, I want to give you a picture of how it could be, an analogy of how it could be that we sometimes are in the dualistic world and sometimes in the monistic world. And my analogy is that our mind, biologically, physically expressed in our brain, acts like a prism. And what is a prism? It's a diversifier of the one light, the one beam of light that is white. And when the one beam of light that is white goes through the prism, light appears as colors, as a spectrum of colors, and these colors might appear distinct. Red is not blue, blue is not green, so there are differences. But they all come from the same source, from the one beam of white light. And the prism is the diversifier. So where is the prism in our being? Could it be that the physical body with the physical brain, and maybe especially represented in the standard default network of our brain, is the prism that gives us the impression that the world has fallen apart into pieces? The German philosopher and poet and artist Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who is one of our classic national poets who lived 200 years ago in Frankfurt and in the city of Weimar, wrote in his masterpiece, The Theory of Colors, published in 1810, that colors are the deeds and the suffering of light. Isn't that a very beautiful description of these two aspects of Advaitic and Dvaitic philosophy? There is this beam of one light, and when it goes through the prism, it suffers, and it acts in deeds, making it appearing different in different colors. But it has one source, and in essence, it is one, but it appears different. So Goethe says that the colors tell us about their deeds. They have gone through the prism. They have suffered the experience, suffered in inverted commas maybe, suffered the experience of interacting with the glass of the prism, with this, which is dense matter. And out of this pure white light, the light beam diversifies into the colors. In this analogy, white light is the Advaita aspect of light, and colorful light are the Dvaita aspects, the divided aspects of light. So is our suffering the Dvaitic aspect of our being. And the diseases are the consequence of the interaction with the prism, with matter. Let us once again look at the two philosophies, the non-dualism, which seems to be the big oneness, the Brahman, the Trinity. And when this goes through the density of what appears as matter, the world starts to appear as dualistic. And the prism is the threshold between the one and the other. In the Holy Bible, there is a beautiful description right at the beginning where this separation is described as the fall of man. The fall of man, as described in Genesis 3 of the Old Testament, is the fall from oneness into duality or separation. From being one with God, Advaita, from living in the paradise, into being expelled from paradise and separate, Dvaita. From innocent to knowing. Genesis 3 says that Eve ate the apple from the tree of knowledge. And Lucifer, a spirit that betrayed her or indulged her to eat from the forbidden tree of knowledge, gave her the apple, and she picked it up against God's law to not eat from it. But when she ate from it and then she gave it to her husband Adam, they became knowledgeable, expressed in the Biblic symbol of they were ashamed. All of a sudden they become aware of their nakedness, they become aware of their gender, and they feel ashamed for the first time in the history of man, eating from the tree of knowledge. And shame as a way of suffering becomes the consequence of becoming knowledgeable. And another consequence of becoming knowledgeable is to be not in paradise any longer, to feel separate from God, to feel in the world of Dvaita being separate in a dualistic expression. So good and evil begins to manifest in the mind of man after this experience of being expelled from the oneness, from the paradise, and the fall into the duality. So radical forgiveness guides us back into a paradise experience where good and evil collapses into oneness. That's another way to look at radical forgiveness. And this story at the beginning of the Old Testament tells us the shift from the oneness experience, the paradise, into a dualistic experience of being on earth and suffering and feeling ashamed. And it said that Adam needed to work hard to make his day, working hard on the field and make the bread and the food for his family. And it said that Eve needs to give birth to babies and suffer in active labor to do that. So suffering and hard work and feelings of being ashamed belong to the world of duality. And if we go back in Advaita, mindfulness, radical forgiveness, we can find a way back into paradise, but now not as innocent and naive human beings, but as knowledgeable beings at the same time. Maybe this is what it is all about, to go back into Advaita, knowing about Dvaita. We all came from Advaita, we fell down in the world of Dvaita, and now we look for a way back, knowing about the duality, but breaking through the veil of illusion, going back into Advaita, knowing about the illusion of Dvaita. The next step is an excursion into classic physics, and I need to speed up a little bit. You can study the same story about duality and oneness if you study classic versus quantum physics. Classic physics, also called Cartesian physics after the French scientist and philosopher René Descartes, who lived in the 16th century, refers to the dualistic world. Mental and physical aspects are separate. Dualism dominates in his philosophy, with separate objects and a three-dimensional space of X, Y, and Z. Quantum physics refer to the atomic and subatomic world and brings energy and matter together. Einstein's famous equation E equals m times c square says that energy and matter are the same, with fuzzy boundaries and paradox phenomena that are described in quantum physics experiments. Light as a wave or light as a particle. It has two aspects. If you study the nature of electrons or light, they can appear as particles, but light can also appear as a wave. And the question is, when does light collapse into one or the other? And the truth seems to be, it happens in our mind. The way we look at it defines how it appears. If we look at light as something that shows up as a wave, we find a wave. If we look at light with devices that detect matter, we find matter. When does the collapse happen? It collapses in our mind and with the way we look at it. And there is a very interesting term called decoherence that happens through the interaction of the Advaitic superposition of the electron with the environment, with the world. Decoherence reduces the quantum coherence and collapses into this or that. And again, the prism is the experiment that physicists perform, the prism in inverted commas, that makes the one or the other out of the oneness, that creates the transition from Advaitic aspect of the wave that is in superposition. It's both. When it's in superposition, it's wave, energy, and matter at the same time. It is not decided yet. It's Advaitic. It's both. But then an experiment happens, and we use certain devices, and we find either the one or the other. And I leave that out. It's another excursion of this superposition phenomenon in quantum mechanics, where the undefined state is called C or psi, the state of the electron in the Schrödinger equation. And during superposition, there are two quantum states at the same time. Advaita, spirit and matter are the same. But through interaction with the external world, it collapses into one or the other. The reduction of the state vector happens in the interaction with the world, with the physical world, and in classical observables such as momentum or position. So you can learn the same story if you go into the interaction between quantum mechanics and classic physics, Dvaita and Advaita. In our awareness, the non-dualistic experiences are described in various spiritual schools. In Japanese, it's called Satori, the name for a metaphysical understanding, a summit experience. In Vedantic tradition, it's called Turiya, the state of mind beyond, a unifying state of awareness, intensified awareness, or with another beautiful word, a numinous experience. A numinous experience is an experience that we have no words for. It's a spiritual inner experience of altered awareness, intensified awareness, and oneness. The ego death experience is a non-dualistic experience. And in Buddhism, it is described in the mantra, Nirvana is samsara, and vice versa. The world of Nirvana is the same as the world of samsara, the world of suffering. It's one, and it can be experienced in the altered mindset. Now we have to go to the headline of my lecture. What has all this to do with healing? Thank you for bearing with me through this lecture so far. Now we come to the core. What does this have to do with healing? And what is healing? Let me characterize healing as to make something whole again, or to save something. If you go into the etymology of the word healing, it means wholeness, or to save something, to become one. What has fallen out of oneness needs to be healed, or to bring something together with what it misses. That is true healing. Holism is the mother of all healing, the acknowledgement that the world is one, expressed in the Greek word holism, oneness. Or religion, from the Latin word religio, to reconnect from what we have been separate from. Classic medical treatments, if you go to a classic hospital, Western world Orthodox hospital, can give you treatments, medical treatments, most of the time block the unwanted symptom. You take a painkiller if you have pain, you take a beta blocker if you have high blood pressure. Medical treatments in the world of dualistic mindset block the unwanted symptom. The one that you don't want is blocked by another thing. Healing is something totally different. Healing recreates a state of oneness. The only way to find no contradiction in quantum mechanics is through mathematics. Mathematics is in the realm of Advaita. In the visible world, phenomena appear contradictorily, Dvaita, divided into two. The observation process in quantum physics changes the particle nature of the atom. And with the observation, a particle, and without observation, it's a wave. The collapse happens in our mind. Non-locality is a virtue of Advaita. In the healing process, the future is brought into the now. The healing process knows about what needs to be healed. When a wound heals, the wisdom behind wound healing knows about the future, the state of being whole into which it works its way into being healed. This source of healing comes from the oneness, from the Advaita, and not from the blockage of something you don't want. And from the past, the genetic material has an effect on the present. My genes come from the past, from my ancestors, so they define a little bit the biochemical pathways of my healing process from the past, from my ancestors. And in the process of healing, the process of now, the past and the future, the picture of being healed acts together. And that is the healing, the oneness that brings the past and the future together in the now. So dualistic worldview gives us the treatments and the blessings of modern medicine and orthodox medicine in a hospital. And sometimes we need it. We need a replacement of a joint that is worn out, or we need somebody to fix a broken leg or to close a wound from a traffic accident. But that is the world of dualistic worldview, the Dvaita worldview. The healing comes from the mindset of Advaita, where we meditate, go inside and let the healing happen, which comes from the source of oneness. Conventional orthodox treatments block the symptoms. Dvaita, healing, recognition from within to the unity in pluriformity, which is wholeness. And healing happens in between the treatments, in the non-dualistic, non-localized realm of Advaita. And what we need, my final phrase, is a rhythmic sequence of conventional medical treatments and Advaita practices, and they work together synergistically. So in my work as a medical doctor, I'm at home in both worlds and I unite them in my mind. And sometimes I need to use a tool from the physical world and block a symptom. If patient comes with terrible pain, I need to give the patient a painkiller. But I work at the same time on the inner aspect of healing with meditation and the portals that I've shared with you, and allow healing to happen from within. And there is no contradiction with it, because we decide with our mind how we look at the world. We are the creator of Advaita or Dvaita experiences. We can move our perspective, our mind, to the two aspects and become one in both. That was my lecture. Namaste. Thank you for your attention. And if you want to learn more about that in a more medical form, I advise you to read my book, Holistic Cancer Medicine, that Ram has already introduced so kindly. And if you have a health issue that you need help with, look at our website, our Cardia Praxis Clinic, and send us a note. We would be honored to help you. Thank you for your attention. Namaste.